Thank you very much. Hello everybody, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Jim, for your great presentation. And the last video, I think that tomorrow there's a session on the relationship between human beings and wild animals, so I think it was a great example. So again, I'm very happy to discover Singapore, the real garden city. Our deputy mayor in charge of green spaces, biodiversity, animal welfare always say that we should move from gardens into city to city inner gardens. So maybe now we should talk about the city in the nature. But of course, for Paris, it's like a dream, and well, Singapore made this dream come true. So that's why I'm so excited to hear more and discover more about what the job you've done here to achieve that. So maybe next slide, please. Just some few words to explain the situation of Paris and the city of Paris for over. So the Paris greater area in terms of population, as you can see, is 12 million people living. But the city of Paris, my employer, is only controls only the center of this city. 2 million people living in a 10-kilometer diameter disc with 2 big hoods on the sides. It's the picture you can see on the right. And we have a very high density in Paris, because if you compare, for example, to Singapore, you can see that Singapore is 7 times bigger than the city of Paris itself, and the population is only like twice more. So this means that our density is 2.5 higher than Singapore, and this is only for people living in Paris, 2 million people living. But Paris is also the capital, the world capital for tourism, whether business tourism or normal tourism. So this means that we welcome every day much more, like 2 or 3 times more visitors than people living in Paris, whether it be people that come for their job, their day-to-day job, or for business events or for visiting the city. So that makes a tremendous pressure on the city and on the green spaces, obviously, and on the nature. Next slide. So that's a typical image of Paris. So as you can see, it's not a very green environment, so very mineral, very dense, as I said. So at this point, you might be wondering, well, in such an environment, such a big density, what can a city like Paris do to be a friendly environment for nature? Why am I here talking about nature in the city compared to, for example, the garden city of Singapore? It sounds crazy to talk about the garden city, speaking about Paris. So that's a good question, and maybe we try to discover what we are trying to do in Paris and where we start. So next slide, please. So the first surprising thing about Paris, if you think of the picture before, is that 1/3 of the city is already green. It doesn't seem to, but I'm only talking here about real green earthland and green roofs. I'm not talking about the urban canopy. So this is thanks to a rich heritage from the past, from our predecessors, that in the 19th century decided to make many parks all over the city. We have more than 500 parks in every neighborhood. 2 big hoods, as I mentioned before, and also to redesign the city with this long and wide avenues lined with trees. So planting many trees, 50,000 trees at that time in the 19th century. And well, this gives us these results of today. Also, I wanted to mention the green roofs. As you see, we have more than 100 hectares of green roofs already. This is because we, in the urban master plan of Paris, there is a rule that says that for any new building or renovated building, if your roof is more than 100 square meters, which is very small, it has to be green. So this over the time made good results on greening roofs. And now, as you mentioned, we are renewing our urban master plan, and these rules get more ambitious. Next slide, please. So this gives us a lot of a great range of environments in Paris. Of course, we have the typical gardens, jardin français, very horticultural, but also wastelands or canals or riverbanks or you see a green roof. So that's to say that we have many other environments that are sometimes much better for biodiversity than the traditional parks. Next slide, please. And we also have, like in the city, microenvironments that are very important for food supply or habitats for the fauna. And I could put a picture here of a gutter. I know we have a specialist in the room today, dear Pascal. I don't know where you are. Okay. So maybe we can talk about that later. But all these microenvironments are very, very important. So I want to insist on that. Next slide, please. So what can we do to make the city greener? Because of course that's not enough, that's never enough for the reasons that you mentioned before, Jim, climate change, human well-being, health, physical health, mental health, and of course nature and biodiversity. And you also mentioned, Jim, the importance of the political will in a long time. And in Paris we are also lucky, some people believe that for more than 20 years now, it's the same political side that is in power since 2001. So there's a real political motivation to green the city for a long time. But if you look at the numbers, hopefully there won't be too many numbers today, but in 20 years we created 20% of new additional gardens in the city. And in this mandate, in 6 years, we want to create 20% more. So we really want to go much, much faster in the greening of the city. And of course, the more you green the city, the harder it is to green it more, because the easy part you do it before, so it's getting harder. So yeah, our main goals are to have 30 hectares of new gardens, but also 100 hectares of new greening in the public space. And how can we do that? Well, the idea is to change the way that we share the public space and have less space for cars and more space for soft mobility and greening. You have an example on the picture here. So this was a parking for a car. And in this mandate, we aim to transform half of the surface reserved for car parking and to make it whether green, whether for soft mobility. So it's a huge transformation of Paris. We usually say that it's a major transformation that we haven't seen since the 19th century and our predecessor that I mentioned before. And we also have another goal, that is to open 300 hectares of new gardens by 2040 in the new climate plan that we just voted this year. Next slide, please. So this is just to give you some examples of how we are greening the city right now, so some achievements. So this is a typical avenue. You see we have green cobblestones, and you see that there are much less cars after than before. Next slide, please. This is also an interesting street because it's typical of the very small streets in Paris where you could think that you can't do anything with them. They are too small, but in fact you can do it everywhere, or almost everywhere. And sometimes it's not easy to convince the people who live there, who wants to park their cars there, or because they are shop owners and they don't want this project. But then when it's transformed, they usually don't complain, as you can see on this picture. Next, please. We can do it on squares, of course, so you get the point, before, after. Next slide, please. We also try to, every time it's possible, we try to join the tree bits, as you see, with ground planters. So this you can do it also in many streets. So if you come to Paris right now, also because of the Olympic Games, you will see works all over the streets, and it's mainly to green the public space. Next slide, please. We're also creating new gardens, so this is under work right now. It will be a new park of 3 hectares. It's important, and we have other projects in the north of Paris in our urban master plan. But as I mentioned before, as we already did everything we could, or almost in creating new parks, it's getting harder. So maybe we are not very far from the end of this project. Next slide, please. And this is very important also, planting trees. You mentioned it also, Jim, it's a key issue and key nature-based solution for cities. So we are really trying to plant in every spot possible, so many in the ring road banks, in every street, as you saw before, but also in squares like this one, to create some kind of urban forest. Of course, in Paris, everything is very tiny and dense, but we can do it. So for example, this square called Place de Catalogne. To be honest, the work started in late 2022, 23, but this is the plan, and this is a real picture. That's what it looks like today. So see how fast it goes from completely mineral square to less than 2 years urban forest. And of course, this has to be much higher when it will be with the years. Paris is also involved for a very long time in ecological management, and for all the maintenance of our gardens and parks, we avoid any chemical products. We started this policy in 2001, as I mentioned, the new political parties, and we completed in 2009 when the French law made it mandatory in 2016 or 17. So we really did it much before it was mandatory, and I think we are one of the only cities in Europe to do it at that scale. When I talk to other big cities, they wonder how we do it, and we did it because the gardeners all those times it's impossible to go to zero chemical pesticides. Well, it's been hard work, but it's possible. Paris can prove that. And of course, we do differentiated management. We respect the nesting periods. We do late mowing so that the plants can make full cycle. Next slide, please. We also involve the public with what we call the greening permits. So the idea is to give a small piece of land, here 3 bits, to the citizens so that they can green it and participate in the greening of the city. Next slide, please. I already mentioned the green roof, so we get the point. We involve the private sector, as I mentioned, with the urban master plan. They have to green their roofs if they want to renovate or build a building, but we also did it in our roofs, the municipality roofs. More than 100 of our roofs, mainly, for example, for schools, were greened with either biodiversity reserves or urban agriculture. Next slide, please. So all this is very good, but how can we? It's a lot of money that we invest. It's a lot of work, but how? What do we know about the impact of these measures on the nature? I mean, it's very complicated to measure that. I'm sure you know that, Jim. So that's why we really need to have international standards like the Singapore Index to understand how the nature is evolving and and to prove to the public, to the politicians, that what we are doing is actually good, not only for human beings, which is the main reason, we also mentioned it, Jim, but also for nature. So, next slide. What do we do in Paris to better understand our environment? So, first, good news is that we have a dedicated team of ecologists and naturalists in the city, my team, that work for a very long time in understanding our nature, and we published twice an atlas of the nature in Paris. The second edition was in 2020, the same time as we calculated for the second time in the Singapore Index. It was very useful, of course, to have these criteria, important criteria. We have a biodiversity observatory, which is not a place to watch biodiversity, but a place to welcome all the academics, the NGOs, the citizens to share knowledge about biodiversity and nature in the city. We have international partnerships with, you mentioned some of them, IUCN, Italy, UNEP, World Bank. UNEP is the United Nations Environmental Program, C40, I don't know if you know this networks. Next slide, please. So this is an image of Paris Biodiversity 2020, so I won't comment all the numbers, you can find that easily on our website. But just to give you one example of how it changed over the years, if you look at the number of species of fishes, mainly in the River Seine, back in the 60s, 70s, we could count less than 5 different species of fish, and now there are 32. So maybe it was because we couldn't see some of them, but I'm pretty sure that it's also because the quality of the water is much better now, because there's a big work that has been done for decades on the water. One concrete example of that is that the city of Paris took back the water management from the private sector like 20 years ago, and it's much better now. So next slide, please. So that's what we hope to see this summer in Paris for the Olympic Games. Sports people swimming in the River Seine, and we really cross fingers that it will be possible. So that means also that we hope to see more fish species in the next years. Next slide, please. And another good news and good example of how the nature is coming back to Paris. We now have foxes that disappeared a very long time ago. Here is an image in a cemetery, famous cemetery of Père Lachaise in Paris that you might know. And we know that they circulate, they move in Paris thanks to the ecological corridors that you mentioned before. So that's pretty good news also. Next slide, please. So that's our map, showed yours, of our ecological corridors. It's been a very long and important job for our teams, and not only our teams, many the scientific community was really involved in this project, because it was very important to have scientific proofs and evaluation of where these corridors and ecological reservoirs are in the city. So it's a very, very serious job, and it's not by coincidence that on the two first indicators of the Singapore Index are precisely the urban reservoirs and biodiversity and the corridors and the fight against fragmentation of the environment. It's a key question. And we won a big battle this year in Paris with this map, because now this map is integrated to our urban master plan. And for example, the new rules of the new master plan say that if you touch to any building or land next to the corridors or reservoirs, the rules are harder. Let's say you have to do more for nature than in other parts of the city. So it's really the central map now in the urban master plan. Next, please. We also do a lot of participative science. I'm sure that Singapore does it also, and many cities do also. I won't insist, but just to say that we are really trying to involve the public and even the kids. Next slide, please. We work with academics, and I wanted to point one example. We have several examples with the Museum of Natural History, but I thank again to welcome me this morning, Alliance Française. And so just to give you an example, we welcomed brilliant PhD students in our teams for 3 years, coming from the Chen, who counted the wild species of bees in Paris, and he discovered much more than we expected, and more species than what we can find in the rural area next to Paris. And this is, we believe, because of the zero phyto, non-pesticide, chemical pesticide policy in Paris, and whether in the rural areas you have a lot of pesticides, so bees are really welcome in Paris. It seems not very evident, but that's what it is. Next slide, please. So, coming to the Singapore Index, Paris is committed to calculate it every 5 years. Well, the commitment is with ourselves, because you mentioned it, it's auto-evaluation. But, so we did that for the first time in 2015. You also explained that we didn't have the data for the counting of some population of species, so that's why we have only 5 indicators completed in this first counting of the indicator, but then we have the score that you can see here. Next slide, please. And we did it again in 2020, and with the measures we had in 2015 of the species, we could measure the variation, the evolution of this species. So we could complete all 23 at that time indicators. Now we know that we have 28 to complete for next edition that we will do in 2025. We are committed to do it. And I won't comment, of course, the 23 indicators, but maybe some quick results. So the first interesting result for me, I think, is that you see that the score 15 points on 20 is not bad, I think. And for example, we saw a positive variation for all species between 2015 and 2020. This is, of course, maybe because we have more people counting, also because we have now a shared database, open database with all the different institutions at a regional scale. It was very helpful to have this to measure the evolution, but also maybe because of the ecological management of our parks. We are not that good in the ecosystemic service, especially on water, because, as I said, Paris is very mineral, very dense. So it's hard to make it more permeable, but we're working on it. That's why we remove the car parking for cars when we build the city. And we also have a challenge in education. We do a lot, but we don't manage the teachers in Paris. It's the state that manages the teachers. So we didn't know exactly what they do for biodiversity. So yeah, as it is only an auto-evaluation, we didn't really care for that. But and Paris is also very good on governance and management. I don't know if you can read it, but it's about 18 points on 20. So that shows the political involvement for a very long time. One symbolic example is that in 2016, the municipality gave the Medal of Paris, which is the highest distinction possible, to biodiversity. And we are committed in many networks. We work with academics, as I mentioned before, with a lot of NGOs. We do hundreds of projects. We have many plans: the biodiversity plan, the rain plan, the climate plan, the sustainable food plan. We have many strategies to really do better for nature and biodiversity. So that's one of our main strengths. Next slide, please. And as to give you an example of how the Singapore Index can make us think about what we can do to improve. I mentioned before that we were not very good at educational criteria. So several years ago, 3 years ago, the mayor of Paris decided to give an entire building, which is a big building, 4,000 square meters, which was a former district town hall, to the youth engaged for climate. We call it the Climate Academy, and it's called climate, but it's of course for climate, biodiversity, sustainable food, and all the environmental subjects. And it's a very cool place with a broad agenda, with learning by doing stuff. With we welcome the youth so that to help them run their projects in favor of environment. We welcome thousands of school kids, but also students, also researchers, and well, if you visit Paris, it's a free place. There's always something happening there, so I advise you to welcome this, to go and visit. Next slide, please. What can we do now to go further? Because we do a lot, we invest a lot of time, of money, of energy in trying to make the city better for human beings and for nature. But I think that something that we don't really do, or not enough, is thinking the impact of the city and the citizens on nature and biodiversity beyond their walls. I mean, what we call the biodiversity footprint. Next slide, please. So, Paris has a biodiversity plan. I mentioned it before. It's a very, it's the second one is finishing right now. You see, it's 2018 to 2024. We have 30 actions, but many sub-actions. I think it's 150 goals, so it's like a big book of like our Bible for biodiversity. So I just gave some examples of actions. One very hard to do, for example, is to convince our gardeners to plant 50% of native species in our gardens. You have to know that Paris has a long horticultural culture, and so to make them plant native species, it's not easy. And we are now also writing the new plan, the new biodiversity plan. We made a big public consultation, and in a nutshell, what we want to do with this new plan, because the previous one was already very ambitious, is to make it more local, so to show people what really will happen for biodiversity in every neighborhood. So each district will have its own goals and challenges, but also to think it more global. So that's what I mentioned before about thinking in our biodiversity footprint. I will give you one concrete example of that. Next slide, please. We have in Paris, we serve every year 30 million meals to our school kids and older people and us, the administration also. And half of this food is already organic. And we have a very ambitious sustainable food plan, which aims to have 75% of organic food by 2027. And we calculated that with this 30 million meals being 75% organic, we preserve 15,000 hectares of rural land, of agricultural land, from any pesticides, because organic, as you know, is without chemical pesticides. And this is maybe, I believe, our main action on biodiversity, if you think about it. So we are running the city, investing amounts of money, very important to take out the concrete and to maintain our gardens, and we always think about that. But I think that thinking in our biodiversity footprint is really a key issue now. And this is an example of food, but we can think in any kind of purchase that the city makes, and even for the real estate and landscape planning. You got it. Next slide, please. So we also are connected to the IUCN, the City of Paris. IUCN, you mentioned it before, but I say it against the major worldwide organization protecting nature. And Paris was the first city to be a full member of the IUCN. It was a very long battle, 15 years, to try to have this full membership. And we were also one of the 6 cities, I think Singapore was also one of the 6 cities involved. It's this new indicator called the Urban Nature Indicator, which is pretty close to the Singapore Index in many topics. For example, chapter 2, 3, I think 6, governance. You can find more or less the same ideas. But it also, in the chapter 1, especially, looks at the biodiversity footprint I mentioned before. So I think that's also an interesting initiative. Next slide, please. And it's really it was released only 1 year ago. So let's see how it works. And maybe last thing to mention that we worked a lot this year with Berlin and other cities in a project run by Ecology. You mentioned them before, another network of cities involved in environmental topics. So the Berlin Urban Nature Pact is not an indicator as a Singapore index, but it's more the idea to decline the big goals of the CBD Convention, so the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or there was before the Edinburgh Declaration for local governments. But the idea is to have more specific, quantitative and concrete goals for cities. So the idea is that to be able to sign this pact, you have to commit to or at least 15 of these quantitative goals. There are 28 different targets, so you can choose what you prefer, what you can do in your city, because every city is different. It was very interesting to exchange with the other cities, understanding that because of our different sizes, different population, different density, history, political competencies we have, the goals can't be the same. And we didn't want this pact to only take the smallest common denominator for all goals. So it was a hard challenge to have ambitious goals for everybody, but that we could share. So that's how we got to the idea of having 28 targets and 15 that you have to complete to be able to sign the pact. And I believe that if we want to act on our biodiversity footprint I mentioned before, we also have to have this kind of target shared at an international level to show again to our politics, our citizens, that it's very important, and it's if we sign it with many cities in the world, it gives trust to this kind of international standards that once only city can't do by itself. So thank you very much. Happy to answer your question.